Thanks everybody for coming down tonight. This is our second to last Black Rock lecture series for this part of the year. We've got one more coming up to wrap up the season on May 15th. It's called Putting It All Together, and we're going to talk about achievable action items. My name is Fraser Haney. I'm the Conservation Director for the Mojave Desert Land Trust, and I'm really happy to see everybody out tonight. Before we get into the program or any of the speakers, I just wanted to announce that does anybody know what's going on up at the National Park and Park Service wide right now? Any hands? Go ahead, raise a hand. Anybody? Where's the feedback coming from? Anybody want to call it out?
National Park Week.
National Park Week. And it's in celebration of the 100th anniversary, the centennial of the National Park Service. This is a big deal. So you'll notice this year that the Rose Parade is themed Find Your Park. That's a pretty big deal to have the Rose Parade themed after you. So it's the centennial of the Park Service, and please get out and enjoy the park and help them celebrate a very big date. So as I thought about tonight's show and I thought about the National Park, I had to think about how lucky we are to have Joshua Tree in all of our backyards, and what a pillar it is for the conservation community here, both as a playground and as a classroom. And it kind of anchors all the conservation efforts that we've seen across our region, our desert region, in a big way. It drives our interest to find out more about the natural world, and visitors from around the world are introduced to the wide open spaces in the desert and the true richness of this place, many through Joshua Tree National Park. And so it's important to use these opportunities as we're in the park and visitors are coming to the park and the desert in general to educate people about why it's a unique resource. What is a desert? How do we have to take care of it? What's so special about it? Why do we love it? And that's why it's so important for the park to have a great partner like the Joshua Tree National Park Association. So as the park's primary nonprofit partner, the association's mission is to assist with the natural and cultural resource preservation and educational activities of the whole national park. The association, to do this, operates 4 visitor center bookstores that are often the first stop for people as they come into the area and into the national park. The association also raises funds for the park through public events and a membership program. So if any of you in the audience are not a member of the association already, we can get you signed up tonight. I think it's a very good idea if you're here to make sure that you're supporting the association. And they also operate the Desert Institute, which offers classes taught by experts in the park, cultural history and the arts, as well as coordinating this Black Rock lecture series that you're attending this evening. So I'd like to introduce a few of the directors that are in the audience tonight, and if I miss anybody, you'll have to correct me and raise your hand. But Lorraine Turk, please raise your hand. Everybody, please. Mark Wheeler. Hi, Mark. And Kevin Powell. Where are you, Kevin? There you are. You're hiding in the back. Did I miss anybody? We want to give credit where credit's due. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the association's executive director, Meg Foley, who does a wonderful job keeping everything organized and has done a wonderful patient thing under duress with your facilities lately. So let's have a round of applause for Meg. And of course, Kevin Wong. Thank you, Kevin, for organizing this. And we wouldn't be in this room tonight without the co-sponsorship and support of Copper Mountain College. So I'd like to thank Jeff Cummings, Jeff, and Dr. Paul Delaney as well. Thank you, Dr. Delaney. You guys have been here for every single one of these. I know, because I have 2, and that's great. It's great to have your support. So just a last thought, and we'll get into people who really know what they're talking about. In building our understanding of the ecosystem in this area, we've also learned about the threats to the ecosystem. And I think maybe we'd all agree that there's no larger threat to our desert as a whole than a changing climate. And so we have to keep in mind that while climate may have changed historically, slowly over time, right now it's changing very rapidly. And this is driving things like species extinctions, or at the very least, shifts in where species live. So it's more important now than ever to protect the resources that sustain wildlife, and also worry about the cumulative impacts of projects, things like pumping precious groundwater that supports desert springs, or making sure that wildlife corridors aren't being cut up by road improvements or energy development, and that native plant communities are being taken care of in the face of invasive species. And education like this is where it all starts. So with this in mind, I'm excited to introduce our first panelist. Each one of them specializes in deepening our collective understanding of this changing climate. And I'll give Cam a plug before he comes up. Dr. Barrows is working on a major climate change study across our area, setting out transects in Joshua Tree National Park and some other surrounding protected areas. And we're going to be doing annual monitoring to try and understand how climate change is actually unfolding in our region. And Dr. Barrows needs volunteers for this right now. So if any of you are interested in coming out for a Friday to help do some monitoring in the field, you would be well educated and dearly needed. So without further ado, Dr. Cameron Barrows is the Associate Research Ecologist at the University of California, Riverside Center for Conservation Biology. His research interests include understanding the drivers and stressors of biodiversity in the arid regions of North America and developing strategies for sustaining biodiversity across a landscape increasingly modified by human use. Come on up, Cam.
Thank you all very much. Can you hear me all right? Yes? Yes, good. Thank you for inviting me. I will say in many ways this project has been a dream come true for me. I can think back when I was probably about 9 years old and thinking about what I really wanted to do in my life. And being a biologist for the national parks was the thing. And never got there, but this collaborative work that we're doing with the parks right now is the next best thing. And so I finally feel like I've achieved my 9-year-old goal, is to actually work with the park. And so it's been a very, very special experience for me. As I said, this has been completely collaborative from day one. And you can see from the slide behind me that we have a couple people working through the University of California's Center for Conservation Biology. But by and large, this is being manned or womaned by the folks from the National Park Service or the people that work with them, the Great Basin Institute. So whatever we do, we're doing it together, and I just want to make that very clear. Climate change, that's what I was invited to talk to you about. I doubt if I have to convince any of you that climate change is real, but just to give you the background, this is real data. This isn't somebody's model. This shows you the change in climate over the last probably about 120, 130 years when we've had real good measurements that we can depend on. It is increasing. The reasons for that are pretty apparent. There's a pretty close correlation with the increase in carbon dioxide that humans have largely been responsible for. But the impact of that on our natural biodiversity is something that really is the focus of what myself and the Park Service has been trying to address here. Just to understand this a little bit more, if I remember the slides right, these are data. I'm sorry, I'm a scientist. I'm going to show you some data slides. My wife always kicks me when I do this, but these are temperature data from 29 Palms. So rather than show you some global temperature increases, I wanted to show you something that is right in your backyard or probably in your front yard as well. And if you look at the top one, that's maximum summer temperatures, and it hasn't increased all that much. If you look at the scatter of points, it's not really all that significant increase. There is a general trend that it is increasing, and this is Fahrenheit, which I'm not used to using. We usually use centigrade, but Fahrenheit, a little bit more than a degree and a half over since they started collecting data, which was in the 1930s. But if you look at the bottom one, that's the cold temperatures, the cold winter temperatures, and those have increased dramatically, as much as 6 degrees Fahrenheit. The mean overall is about 3 degrees, and that's, if you look at the previous slide, that's exactly what the previous slide shows globally. So what's happening in the desert is exactly what's happening globally. We are increasing. When I talk about this in the low desert, I get all the people who are gardeners start nodding their heads saying, yeah, I get that, because now, at least in the low desert, they can grow tomatoes all year round. You weren't able to do that when I moved there 30 years ago. There was always killing frosts several times during the wintertime. Never happens again anymore. We just don't get those anymore. I know you still get really cold temperatures here and you can't grow tomatoes all year round, but you probably can start planting your garden a lot earlier than you were before. And this is the result, or this temperature increase is why that has happened. So that doesn't sound like a bad thing, but when you couple it with increased evaporation, less water is available for the animals and plants, and so that critical winter rain isn't having the same kind of impact that it used to have in terms of the native plants and animals. And we see that in the annual plants, the perennial plants, as well as, you know, the recharge of our springs, things along that line. This is my slide that goes back in time a lot more. This is almost 900,000 years, almost 1 million years, basically the Pleistocene. And each of those peaks is a hot period. Each of those valleys is an ice age. So climate changes happened over and over and over again. And this is my ray of hope, because during all of those climate changes, we lost ground sloths, we lost mastodons, we lost camels, we lost horses, we lost lots and lots of stuff. But every animal and plant that you see today survived. So something within their genetic structure has given them the power to deal with at least the same kind of climate change that we've had in the past. The question is that going to be, going forward, is that the same intensity, the same speed, the same duration that they've had in the past? And that's something that we just don't know. And so these are unknowns that we need to try to address. So one of the things that we've tried to do is come up with some ways of predicting the future. And predicting the future is always uncertain. Even as careful as you're going to be, it is uncertain. But it gives us a way of planning and creating, and this is a scientific term, but a hypothesis for what the future might look like. And then we can collect data that helps us understand whether the hypothesis is right or wrong. And so we did this in 2 different ways. And this, again, is collaborative with the park staff. One of them was just to dive into the literature and find out what we know about animals and plants and see whether or not what has been done in terms of studies in the past will guide us to tell us what is happening now in the future. So if you look at, it's hard to probably for you to read this, but these are just reptiles because I love reptiles. If the plant people were giving the talk, it'd all be plants, and that's fine for them, but I like reptiles, so that's what I'm going to talk about. And so this vulnerability score, if the farther, go back, the farther to your right it is, the more vulnerable it appears to be based on the current information that we have. And so if you look at this, night lizards, fent lizards, coast horn lizards, and tortoises are all the top 4 most vulnerable species that we have within the park. If you look at the bottom, desert iguanas, desert spiny lizards, desert horn lizards, and maybe even the red-spotted toad probably aren't that vulnerable based on what we know from the literature. And so that's one way that we can create a hypothesis as to which species are likely to move and which ones aren't going to move nearly as much. There's another thing we can do, which is we can model their habitat where they occur today, and as long as temperature is part of that model, we can then say, well, what happens if we add 1 degree, 2 degrees, or 3 degrees? Now, 3 degrees centigrade is what kind of a worst case scenario, end of the century type situation. So, for instance, this is, I'm going to put a plant in here for all you plant people. This is the pinyon pines that occur within the park. The yellow or the cream color is where they occur today. The red is where they would occur by the end of the century based on this type of modeling. It doesn't look good for pinyon pines. It doesn't look good at all. Joshua trees. this is the icon of the park. And we actually got involved in this study because there was a previous work done by a different agency that said all the Joshua trees in California were basically going to go away by the end of the century. They'd all go extinct. They can't handle climate change. And my sort of tongue-in-cheek was, well, before you change the name of the park to something like Creosote Bush National Park, maybe we ought to look at this at a different scale, because they were looking at it at this huge, huge scale, and we're missing all the nooks and crannies and the microclimates where the Joshua trees might be able to hang out. And so we did it again at a fine scale and found out, good news, Joshua trees are going to make it through this climate change, at least through the end of the century. Very good news. Bad news, a lot of them aren't. And so that's what this shows you. So the red areas are where we think that the Joshua trees are going to be able to hang out. The cream or the white areas are where we don't think they're going to be hanging out. I need to caution that these are models, and I've never seen a model that's right. I've seen a lot of models that are just completely wrong. But what the models are supposed to do is give us insights as to what to look for, and that's their value. And so that's what we're doing there. Now we get to the real things, which are reptiles. And this is a coast horned lizard. It's one of those, we call it a coast horned lizard, but it occurs within our deserts here. And it's this really wonderful little animal that occurs in the western half of the park. And this is where it occurs today, that green shaded area there. You can see it's the higher elevations, it's the western edge of the park. And this is where it's going to occur based on these models going forward. It doesn't look good for coast horned lizards. It doesn't look good at all. And we've started doing surveys for them, and this is kind of what we're finding. Places that people reported to us, Donna Thomas, who's in the audience here, has showed me, well, she finds them, used to find them here, here, and here. And I go to those places, and I'm not finding them in many of those sites anymore. They seem to have already been pushed out of certain low elevation areas or lower elevation and further east within the park that Donna and other people used to find them there. They don't seem to be there right now. But we still find them. Eureka Peak, go to Eureka Peak, you can find them. They're pretty common up there. So they're still within the park. And so that gives us an idea of where they might be able to hang out. And those kinds of areas really become very special for us to protect. And protect means maybe let's control the wildfires. How do we do that? Well, we can talk about that, but fires are probably going to push species that are already stressed by climate change over the edge, and that's how we would actually lose them. We probably won't lose them by climate change alone, but if we allow the fires to continue, that's where we would probably lose them. This is our desert horned lizard, low elevation species. So here's a species that occurs all through the low elevation areas of the Mojave and Colorado deserts, and this is where we see it in the future. They don't look like they're going to do too bad unless you're down in the Coachella Valley where they disappeared 3 years ago. We can't find them at the low elevations of the Coachella Valley. As soon as you move up into the higher elevations, we're finding them already, or still finding them there, but at the low elevations, we're not finding them at all anymore. And this drought that we're in right now seems to be exactly what they're predicting for what climate change is going to look like. And so this is a pretty good indication. But in the higher elevations, the middle elevations of the park, they're breeding. They're doing really well. So they seem to be doing well within the park, well at those middle elevations, but not so much at the low elevations. And that's the kind of information we need to know to be able to protect them better, to make sure that the biodiversity of the park is sustained. And then there's the tortoise. This is everybody's special animal for the Mojave Desert. I've combined a couple areas here. So that upper area is the 29 Palms Marine Base, and then the park, of course, and then down into the Coachella Valley. This is, again, where they occur today or have occurred most recently. And this is where they will probably occur based on the modeling going into the future. Lots of areas within the park will still be sustained, have the right kind of habitat, but all of those low elevation sites probably won't. We are seeing at the low elevation sites, like in the Pinto Basin, dramatic decreases. And Michael was telling us during dinner that they've had a tenfold or an order of magnitude decrease in the density of tortoises in the Pinto Basin from 30 years ago to today. That's huge. That's a huge decline. They're still there, which is great, but we don't, they're, what, the numbers I think you said was 30 to 50 per kilometer 30 years ago, square kilometer, and now it's 3 to 5. That's pretty dramatic. The good news is they're still there, but they are declining quite a bit. So what are we going to do? And so when you've got models, I think it's for a lot of people, well, we should act on the models, and we should use those models to direct how we think and how we ask questions, but don't use the models themselves. We need to collect data. And so with the park, we've designed a monitoring system where we can document whether these species are doing exactly what the models say or whether the models are wrong in doing something completely different. And we're doing it with citizen scientists, which I'll talk about in a minute or two. So there's 27 places that we've designated as these kind of places we want to protect or to monitor. 9 of them are in the low elevation, 9 of them are in the middle elevations, and 9 of them are at the high elevations. And even today we are out at one of those middle elevation sites, and we're collecting data on the vegetation, the birds, the reptiles, and anything else that we can that will give us insights as to how species are moving up or down within the park elevations. We're finding a lot of species are being impacted already. Species at the low elevations that I knew I was finding them commonly, like even chuckwallas at the lower Cottonwood Canyon and down onto the Bajada there, couldn't find them. Even really common lizards like side-blotch lizards seem really reduced. But the surprising thing was another common lizard, zebra tails, were breeding like crazy and doing really well. So how do you explain one lizard doing poorly and the other doing really well in the face of a 4-year drought? That's an interesting question that we're going to have to start thinking about, because I don't know the answer to that. To do this, we need volunteers. This is a monumental effort that we hope to be able to do over the next 30 or more years. And there's no way that we're ever going to find enough grants to do this with just ourselves. We need people to do that. And so Fraser made a very generous pitch for volunteers, and I just want to encourage any of you that have an interest either in counting plants or counting reptiles or doing any of that stuff. We would love to have your help. We'd love to get you out there, getting a chance to help us make a difference in understanding how climate change is going to impact the park. There's a lot of discussion about whether citizen scientists, volunteers who aren't really trained, can really do that. And what we're finding, and we're collecting the data right now that can to answer that question, what we're finding is that it really makes a huge difference. It gives somebody like me, who I'm a pretty good ecologist, but I've only got 1 pair of eyes, and so when I go out there like I did today, there was 12 pairs of eyes, and we saw so much more than I would have ever seen by myself. And I still had to run around like a chicken with his head cut off to try and make sure that all the identifications were correct and we got the locations correct. But we got really, really good data out of it. And that's what we want to do as we move forward, is to continue to get that really good defensible data to help us guide where we're going into the future. So that's my last slide. I was only given 5 minutes. I'm sure that was 15. We'll have questions afterwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I haven't seen that slideshow before, so that was very good. I want a copy of it.
You probably have it on the computer.
Oh, good. I wanted to just mention that if you have questions as our presenters go along, we do have a question and answer session after everybody is complete. We'll be handing out cards for that once the last of the panelists has spoke. So hang on to those questions. Our next panelist is Michael Vamstad, who works at Joshua Tree National Park. And Michael's been working at the national park since 2004. He started working for the park as the restoration ecologist, and he made the move over to wildlife ecologist in 2007. Michael received his undergraduate degree in field biology, and for 8 years worked on many bird research projects in California, Arizona, Rhode Island, Guam, and Baja California, Mexico. While working for Joshua Tree National Park, he attended graduate school at the University of California in Riverside. And in 2009, Michael received his master's in ecology by completing a thesis on small mammal and vegetation responses from wildfire. So please join me in welcome Michael Vamstad.
Thanks, Fraser. That was generous. All right, well, welcome. Cam explained a lot of the science that we're doing currently in the park, and I wanted to touch on a few of those things, but I also want to talk about the Park Service's angle on this whole thing. What the Park Service is doing, in the face of climate change. Do we recognize the words? Is it illegal to use the words? And pretty much in the Park Service, you can use climate change. It's okay. I'd like to start off with some jokes here. I don't need to explain them. But it really isn't a laughing matter, is climate change. But it is something we should pay attention to and definitely spread the word and get it out there. What we see in some of our most precious parks is a change that we can see just through photos. You got Glacier in 38 here. It's the same photograph through time. And you can see by 2006 it's pretty much gone. We're seeing this in some people's lifetimes, have seen this happen. We're talking about old ice that doesn't melt and get recreated every year. These are glaciers, permanent ice sources that have gone. It's not unique. We're finding it at various national parks. I believe this is Kenai Fjords. This is a fun little photograph. If you can see in the, which one's this? Yep. 1951 here is where the glacier was. So they put a sign at where the edge of the glacier was in 1951. And as you can see, people still have to walk quite a ways to get to the glacier now. Olympic is not outside of this either. They've seen glacier retreats too. This is 1905 to 2010. Basically the glacier, the permanent ice, is now gone. So you can see there's a dramatic change to the ecosystem as well. As the permanent snow has retreated, it's formed lakes and other things like that. And that's when we're talking about some species doing well, some species being able to utilize these habitats, and other species that cannot. But still, you can see from the photograph that it's very clear that something unusual is happening. The Park Service and the government had, a little bit of a learning curve when it came to recognizing climate change. And this is an executive order in 2007 that basically says we should do sustainable things. Doesn't say, really why, but let's get energy efficient and use renewables and things like that. Later on, however, in 2009, we start seeing for the first time, getting into management of different things. But what I want to show out right here is integrate climate change adaptation. So in 2009, the federal government was using the words climate change. Woohoo! 2010, this is a secretarial order here, said the same thing, that we're going to use climate change in our decision-making process now. A lot of us working in 2010 were like, ooh, whoopee, we already are. But they formalized it. The Park Service, and like what we do very well, is create interpretive documents. Things that we're going to plans and strategic plans and things we're going to put together to guide the Park Service's management of these beautiful areas, including Joshua Tree National Park. So we had a climate change action plan, which is over here on the table here. You can check it out afterwards. I think there's even a copy if you want to take one, take one. And so there's an action plan. What are the park going to do? There's adaptation and climate change response strategies. How do you form these? What can you do? There's excellent examples of this throughout the National Park Service. This one here is an underground reef that's changing and dying, basically from solarization, and other issues that are touching. Even San Juan Park in Puerto Rico is going underwater. What are they going to do? So part of this plan is to look at those future scenarios and see what you can do. Green park plans, it means we're going to put solar panels on, we're going to use hybrid vehicles, we're going to use new green technologies when we can. When we retrofit things, we consider these options. We have our first hybrid 4x4 pickup truck, for example, in resources that we use quite frequently. So we are making the change. We're trying to drive the change. It's coming slowly, but we're trying as much as we can when it's available. This is a scenario planning handbook as well. It should be over on the table, all these things. This is San Juan Island, and you can see there's a moat here of water, and apparently there have significant impacts to that cultural resource through rising water levels. So it's all across the Park Service. It's NPS that we're putting these things together. So not only are we recognizing the words, we're doing something about it. I encourage anyone that has any questions or are interested in a little more depth than my little overview right here is to go to the the Park Service's climate change website. And on here are a lot of materials that you can look through. There's also park-specific information. There's even park-specific websites attached to this. Joshua Tree doesn't have one yet, but I just had a discussion today that we're going to work towards it. Thank you, Kathy. So we should be on here. I believe it'll be under effects in parks, and we should have our park in there. So I encourage you to take a look. There's a lot of neat things on that website. We also have plans within different networks and different smaller parks getting together and doing things. And one of these is climate-friendly parks. You know, what are we going to do to try and interpret and lead by example? What are some things we can do to really show the public and encourage people to take their own steps and actions? I want to bring it down a little bit into the park level here, and I like this photograph. This photograph was taken by Josh Hoynes. He was the botanist here at Joshua Tree until very recently, and he ran to Death Valley. I guess it wasn't hot enough here. But this is an interesting slide. I know it's a little hard to see, but what he did is he put circles around all the junipers on this hillside. Green circles are live ones. Brown circles are dead ones. So on this side of the hillside, where it probably has less solarization, so a little bit of that maybe northerly aspect, so it gets less sun, they're doing all real well. There's one dead one down here, but they're all green. But the other hillside is full of all these dead plants and a couple survivors. And what we mean here, why this is very interesting, is that these junipers take a really long time to grow. They also take kind of a long time to die. But the point is that if you look on this hillside, is that we're seeing basically a kind of a fossil record compressed. So these plants are ancient plants, and they've all died within the last decade. You know, why is that? So we're seeing some on-the-ground changes. And as Cam mentioned before, this paper came out in 2011. It was done by Ken Cole. I actually worked with him in Flagstaff when I was there for a little while. But he did a model of where the Joshua trees were at some point in time within the last thousands of years by looking at dung and caves of ground sloths. And he modeled it, and what it really brought forward was Joshua Tree was not included in this future model of where the Joshua trees would be. And it really sparked a lot of interest. Josh would say it sparked too much because he started getting phone calls pretty constantly about where the Joshua tree is going to go in the park. But yet it was an eye-opening experience. It awakened us to this possible sensitivity of Joshua trees to climate change. And Cam's work was then to further make a more precise model where we see reduction of them significantly, but we may still have some refugia for them in the future. But nonetheless, Cam's model, Ken's model agree there's going to be a big reduction, and they might be very sensitive. Some work I've done with Jeff Lovich as well with desert tortoise. We looked through old data sets, did some new data, and found that lowered tortoise numbers really had something to do with extended drought. We all know tortoises can do real well with 1 year of drought, and it seems like they do all right with 2 years of drought. But once you get into 3 years in a row of drought, we see tortoise numbers decline. And so this paper here just showed that we are seeing a lower survivorship of tortoises when there's extended drought. So 1, 2, 3 years in a row of below average conditions. So some of the main 4 things that the Park Service is doing about climate change is that we're trying to use science as much as we can to manage the threats. We are the Park Service. We're a big government agency. We need to have scientific background to our decisions rather than whims. And that's where good science comes in. And so it's cornerstone to understanding the effects of climate change, but also getting into the interpretation of it. Adapting for this uncertain future. What will the park look like in 50 years? What can we do now to ensure a species survivorship 50 years in the future? Can that be done? How would it be done? These are very complex questions and need a lot of scratching of the chin to get through. Reducing our carbon footprint. So yeah, we're replacing our fixtures with fluorescent, we're using greener vehicles, we're driving a lot less. More of our meetings are done online, before we travel. And then finally, on the very bottom here, but not the least, is educating the public. It's probably one of our biggest strengths as the Park Service is that we can show people on the ground with signs like 1951, this was the edge of the glacier. People don't need to be tossed rhetoric to believe in climate change at that point. They can see it for themselves. So it's our job to interpret that and show people, look, just see, and you'll see change. And that's a powerful tool. In Joshua Tree, I've been very proud of our interpretive division and where we've gone recently. The student summits on climate change, getting kids to understand climate change and the effects is paramount. We have evening programs. Each one of our interpretive ranger went through a 2-day solid climate change interpretation seminars where they figured out and got the best ways to interpret this to the public. Every other week we have a program specifically on climate change in Black Rock. And I was even laughing because even our Keys Ranch tour has taken some climate change effects to it. So people are interpreting, Pam Tripp is interpreting climate change effects to the ranch. And finally is studying. The transition zone, the wonderful partnership between University of California, Riverside, and Cam and his crew and the Park Service. Making sure that we have the right science in the right place so we can basically document this over time. This has led to interesting efforts in the basin as a whole. The Morongo Basin Linkage Design. This thing came out 4 or 5 years ago, Fraser, I believe, and it showed our urban communities that there are wildlife corridors possibly in your backyard. And the decisions within these communities really should think about this. People come up to the desert to enjoy the park. People come up here to enjoy all the different crazy species they don't find in LA. They have their own crazy species down there. So they come up here to really enjoy the park. And what this shows is that we can keep these corridors open in our communities if we just have smart urban planning. Back to that transition zone project, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is what Cam and us are doing together. It's looking at these species and how they may change over time. Again, this is our plot. So you had a different map, but you can see it's pretty much pan park. It's across the park. One of my favorite little spots to do this project so far has been this Coxcombs North one. Really neat habitat, really different. One that I had never really been in the park before this project. We have information on the table, I believe, of the California Phenology Project, and you can learn more about that online. So it's basically watching plants over time in your backyard, in the park. It's up to you. It's another way you can get involved. And that's my last slide, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was great. We have one more panelist tonight, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say. It's Ian James. He's an environmental reporter with the Desert Sun. I'm sure that probably every single one of us in this room has read something that Ian has written in the Desert Sun. Ian's a reporter who focuses on water and environmental issues for the Desert Sun. He's a member of the newspaper's investigative team, and he's written extensively about California's drought, climate change, and the issue of growing water scarcity across the Southwest. So please welcome Ian James.
Well, thank you for having me. And also, I've followed along these scientists here in the field in Joshua Tree, and it's been fascinating doing that. And I think I've especially gained a lot of respect for all the work that goes into it, all the painstaking work, the methodical nature of it, and planning out a process where they're going to be going back year after year and trying to look at how the park is changing. That's no small task, and so I think it takes, on their part, a real focus on thinking long-term about what they can do and what the next generation of scientists can do to look at what's happening in the park. I'm a reporter, as you mentioned. I work for the Desert Sun, and they've set this up nicely for me, so I appreciate that. But I think I'm going to talk first before going through the pictures. I'm fortunate to work for a newspaper where I work with an editor who values in-depth reporting and who, is going to say, if we want to look at an important subject like climate change, let's take some time and if it takes several weeks, if it takes a couple months, that's okay, but let's do it right and fully and really get into these issues. And that's, one of the things that I really like about being a journalist is that ability to contribute to public discussion and hopefully to start some discussions. And I think that's an important role that we can play. And so when we set out to write about climate change in the desert and to learn more about it, it was a really big task. We did this last year, just trying to find out what is all the scientific research that's going on related to climate change in this area. What are they finding? And I especially wanted to focus on try to get away a little bit from the models and look at what's been confirmed to date. What has been seen in the plants and animals in terms of how they've moved or how they have changed, died. Particularly the research involving the desert tortoises was very dramatic. And so as we got into it, we realized we wanted to look at it in different chapters: plants, animals, and water supplies, and really sum up that research and tell it in a compelling way. So I think that's, there really is so much out there, but we wanted to tell it in a visual way. And so I also went looking for, some of the great resources that are out there that scientists have put together, some of the maps that trace the changing habitats, as well as some before and after photographs. Because it's not just the glaciers that can be seen like that, but also some of the changing plant makeups of some of these places. And I guess I'll just go to some of the photos. These are photos by Richard Louie, and we traveled all around the desert here, went over to Whitewater with some of the researchers who were doing bird counts, and also went over to see Lake Mead and talked to some of the researchers who are looking at water issues as well. Because I think that in some of the changes that are happening with the plants and animals, there are also hints of some of the bigger challenges that are ahead for people. That, I believe, is Josh, who you were referring to earlier.
That's Josh. That's me.
That's him. And I think part of the being methodical out there, they've got the GPS, they've got the notebooks. So if they see a particular critter, they're marking down that critter and the location. Am I right about that, Cam?
That's right.
And this is near the the Cottonwood entrance to the park?
Wilson Canyon.
Wilson Canyon, okay. Maybe a member of the audience here?
Yep, she's in the second row there. That's Donna.
And I remember in this area, there were a number of desert tortoise holes, not a lot of desert tortoises.
Right. This one is in Cottonwood Canyon.
Yeah. That is an ironwood, happened to be in bloom at that point. Some creative photography there, trying to light up the hole.
Beautiful shots.
Yeah. And I was interested to learn about the scientific research that involves looking at the Joshua trees and looking at the areas where they're successfully reproducing. I'm guessing by the size here, this one is about maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. So in that case, how old might that be?
40, 50 years.
40, 50 years. So, but if it's an area where they aren't successfully reproducing, you're not likely to find many that are much smaller than that. So that's sort of on the lower elevation fringes where some of those changes are starting to be seen. So I think I'll end it there with the photos. But I'm looking forward to the discussion and to any questions, both about what we've done related to climate change, as well as water issues in this area, because ultimately they're both very connected, and water, climate change is water change in many ways. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'll just leave that picture up there. It seems fitting. So we're going to hand out some question cards. So if you have a question for any of the panelists, please just go ahead and raise your hand. You can direct it to one of the single panelists, or just ask the general question, and we'll choose who answers it. While we're working through some of those things, I just want to plug the folks who are spending their evening with us on the side of the room here. And you can get information about the National Park Service or the Mojave Desert Land Trust. I know I have a bias there. Or the Morongo Basin Conservation Association at the panels back there. And a word about, Michael, you mentioned the Morongo Basin linkages study that had been done. It was part of a larger Morongo Basin Conservation Priorities report that was a very collaborative effort with a lot of different entities in the basin, cities and individuals, organizations, water districts. So that was a great tool. It's still a living document, and I think that we're going to see some more of those hit the streets soon in print. I think we're going to get a few hundred more of those printed, and so hopefully you'll see those circulating again very, very soon. So any thoughts that you guys want to begin with before any wrap-up thoughts? Just so that you know, these mics are for the AV, but the center mic is what's going to come through the audio out of the speaker.
Okay.
All right, we've got a few questions. Thank you. All right, so this is to any of our panelists. Do we know if the higher nighttime temperatures have any negative impacts, i.e. the need for frost to germinate more insects or Joshua trees, etc.?
I think I don't know if I'm coming through loud enough, is that all right? Okay. The animals and plants that we have in the park today have evolved with a climate regime which includes very cold winters and cool nighttime temperatures. If you change that, you're going to change when germinations occur, when our insects are going to emerge from the ground. And if that emergence isn't parallel with the species that they're associated with, so if the plants come up before the insects or the insects come up before the plants, That's one of the concerns that many people have about when extinctions will actually occur, when you decouple relationships that have evolved for probably hundreds of thousands of years. Once that decouples, species could go extinct, and so that's certainly a big concern. The other part of it is that the cooler temperatures keep moisture in the ground. The hotter temperatures allow for more evaporation, and so there's going to be lower soil moisture. And lower soil moisture is key to, will impede germination of annual plants. For some species like the yucca night lizard that lives underneath the down branches of the Joshua trees, they like those moist areas under there, and if it's not moist anymore, their activity time is going to be reduced or even eliminated at many elevations. So, yeah, I mean, it may feel good to us not to be quite so cold in the winter or not so cold at night, but it does have an impact. Another impact that it has on us in general is that, and this is something that we're finding already in many parts of Riverside County, is that cold temperature keeps insects we don't like mosquitoes, at bay. And when it's warm at night, the mosquito population builds up faster and larger. And those mosquitoes, in some cases, carry diseases like West Nile and even malaria. And so those are issues that are just for that natural biodiversity around us, but they're issues for us that we're going to have to deal with as well.
Michael or Ian, thoughts about higher nighttime temperatures?
Just the data are pretty striking that we pulled together climate data from across the Southwest, and particularly the nighttime temperatures a lot warmer. And there's some the urban heat island effect, but you can see it all over the place.
I'm just going to follow this one up. Cam, we've got one question. Well, any of the panelists are welcome to answer this. When do you think that the effects of climate change, this is wildly speculative, could drive us out of the Morongo Basin?
Hope not.
Anyone else want to do that, or do you want me to do it?
I think humans are pretty powerful creatures. We're able to adapt to a lot of things. I think the climate change that we're speculating is a 3-degree shift, like Cam was saying, within the end of the century. I think we'll do just fine. Humans are in the same box as coyotes. We seem to be able to live anywhere and be tricky and do a lot of things. And therein lies a lot of the solutions that we're talking about too to this problem. We're recognizing it. We're studying it. We're figuring out what kind of effects it's going to have on the native and wild critters out there. But just in the same voice, though, there's other people studying agriculture and how the agricultural industry may need to be seriously retooled to adapt to this changing climate. Think of California and the amount of fruit trees and nut trees we have right now. We're living in a luxury of water, and that's going to change very quickly. So humans are able to adapt. We'll be able to change. We'll be able to shift gears. We just hope it's quick enough. And I kind of pride myself and Ian and Cam here being involved and on the forefront of this issue. Hopefully our kids will take it as not gospel, but you know what I'm saying. That they'll turn off the water when they're brushing their teeth. They'll watch their uses of things. They'll think about conservation from the beginning instead of having to teach it later in life. So I think we will do just fine in the Morongo Basin, at least within my lifetime and a few others. But it's a concern. How long can the desert be livable? How long will California be livable with the crops that we're doing right now? So it's an interesting question. It's one to think about, and it's a fun one to think that maybe humanity will figure this one out too.
Very good. As a follow-up, we're going to think about the other species here in the Morongo Basin. And the question, and I might have part of the answer here, is what is being done to help improve or secure the migration pathways when it comes to urban planning? And what can residents in the Morongo Basin do to help? You guys go.
Answer first.
I'll just pitch this one, and then you guys can do as you wish. One of the efforts is the Mojave Desert Land Trust is trying to acquire land inside of the migration corridors on the west end of Yucca Valley, right at the top of the Morongo Yucca grade. And also, how many people here know when I say Section 33, does that ring a bell with anybody? Yeah, most people know. So that's a piece of the migration corridor between Joshua Tree National Park and the 29 Palms Marine Corps Base that the Land Trust secured in 2013. So there's some direct action being taken by the trust. There's also other studies being done. You'll hear soon about some studies being done by Clint Epps and John Weihausen about bighorn sheep migration corridors that are having a real good positive effect on helping to plan for wildlife migration across the desert. And also, if anybody doesn't know, the Christine Penrod South Coast Wildlands desert connectivity studies, those are really great too. So those are a few of the things that are being done. There's many more, but I'll kick it back to the panelists.
You know, these urban planning documents, like what Fraser is talking about with these linkages, I think it's key to the urban planners to be able to see where these species may exist or may need to have in order to keep things intact. But also, selling it to the community, that the community and members at large care about the wildlife in the area, care about their national park, looking at areas where critters can move back and forth. Part of green areas or natural areas within a community are generally seen as the prize of the community. So these documents, and I'm glad they're making it into our political systems in the basin. I'm not sure how effective they are, but being that they are there, they have to have some impact. And I'm kind of proud of this Morongo Basin community. There's a lot of interesting folks out there. And comparing it to other desert cities, we have people that care above and beyond some of the other communities I've been in the desert. So I applaud the Morongo Basin for putting that together. And we met together, Fraser and I, with some of the local politicians to describe that effort when it was rolled out. So people know about it, and hopefully action will be taken on the part of it. And I also hope those kind of connectivity things become standard for all the desert communities. Let's put this together to see where our wild areas are that are really important to connect mountain systems and species and critters. Things that some people do come to the desert to see, and tourism dollars are good dollars for everyone.
Cam or Ian, can you reflect about the Coachella Valley maybe and some of the things that are going on down there in the sense of urban planning? And
Sure. Well, in the Coachella Valley, we started actually one of the first habitat conservation plans ever created back in 1986 for the sand dunes and a few species, primarily the Coachella Valley fringe-toed lizard. And it became apparent very rapidly that sort of protect this and let everything else develop around it, protect that, let everything develop around it, wasn't going to work at all. And it evolved, and it took a long time to do it, but evolved and was approved in 2008, a multiple species plan. So now it looks at all of the biodiversity of the Coachella Valley, and it specifically identifies connectivity corridors and connecting the Whitewater Canyon all the way to between San Bernardino Mountains to the San Jacinto Mountains, and trying to make sure that those corridors are maintained in the connectivity between the park across to the Indio Hills and into the Thousand Palms area is a critical part of that. It's pretty amazing to stand near I-10 when you're at sea level and you can look up at Keys View and know that all of that land is protected between I-10 and Keys View. You're going from sea level to over 5,000 feet. It's all protected. It's either national park or it's Fish and Wildlife Service refuge or it's Bureau of Land Management or it's state Fish and Wildlife, but state parks are in there. It's all protected, and so it's pretty amazing. There's a lot more to be done, and one of the things that I'm going to do a presentation tomorrow about is that one of the problems we have in the Coachella Valley that you don't seem to have nearly as much, if at all here, is that they view nature as something over there, and where we live is different because we're going to put in our lawns and our swimming pools and our everything like that. And I think that that's really wrong thinking, and I don't think it's the kind of thinking that I see when I drive around the Morongo Basin at all. And I think that if we landscape with native plants and landscape, maintaining the native landscape as much as we possibly can, then there's a blending of nature. So nature becomes part of our environment. It's not something over there that we can point to and say there's nature. It's part of where we live, and I think that's really critical.
Do you have thoughts about that?
Not about nature connectivity, but definitely about water use. Yeah, I think if you compare the per capita water use here, I mean, you see it when you drive around, of course. It's such a dramatic difference from going to Rancho Mirage or someplace like that. So probably cutting back 35 or 50% down there would still not be quite as in tune with the environment as Morongo Valley. But anyway, I think some of those changes are going to be probably forced upon the Coachella Valley pretty soon in some way or another. Maybe higher bills.
Inevitable, especially if the governor has his way, right?
Yeah.
I will say too, we've noticed as people have been reaching out in communities in the Morongo Basin and asking, at the Land Trust at least, about what they can do. There's the Waterwise Landscape Tour that's happening that the Morongo Basin Conservation Association puts on. So there are community efforts, and I think we all have to think about what we can do on our own property, or think about how we affect a community change, because I would love to buy all the land in the Morongo Basin that's conservation needed, but it's totally impossible. So I think we're going to have to do it as a community, and I see that starting to happen. There's a consciousness in the basin at least. So a next question to each panelist: what are the top 2 things each person in the United States can do to reduce climate change? Good question.
Vote. And then vote again, those 2.
That's a very good answer.
Yeah, I think one of the top things they could adopt some kind of conservation ethic. Taught at home with their parents. Parents are the best teachers. Teachers are the next teachers. But I think we need to evolve, our humanity to look at what resources we have, how to protect them, how to use the ones we use sustainably. And just in general is really follow a new conservation ethic that does start in your home. It's not just in the forest, it's not just in the parks, but everywhere. Tread lightly.
Ian?
Definitely heard a lot of people talking lately about a new sort of water ethic, and that certainly seems to be related to dealing with the effects of climate change. I think the question was what to do about climate change, right? So I think that's more of a question that comes down to innovation, and maybe many people can answer in different ways. For me as a journalist, I really enjoy looking at important problems, big issues. For someone else, it may be tinkering with the next generation of airplane that's going to be jetting people around with a lot less fossil fuels. So hard to say, but I think it requires a lot of innovation and people looking at what they can do and just being conscious of really the larger crisis.
There's a kind of a broader question here about some of the things we could do as a society, and what are the pros and cons of thinking about things like cloud seeding?
I can answer. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about cloud seeding, just what I've read about it, but I understand it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It might produce a little bit more rain, but it's certainly not going to ease a major drought when there's, the soil is so dry already. There's just not that much water in the system.
I recently heard some data that they either couldn't detect a difference, or the difference was something close to 10% or less by cloud seeding. So I don't think that's an answer. I think that, I guess maybe if you add it to the whole bag of tools that you need, maybe, but it's really not the answer.
Well, one other thing that we haven't mentioned, about this current drought is that
not only is it super dry, but the last 3 years have been the hottest on record. So, right there for California as a state. So there's a certain feedback where it's drier because it's hotter and it's hotter because it's drier.
That's right, there's a positive feedback. Another question, I thought this was a great one. Ian, what has been the reader's reaction to your series about climate change?
Really positive reaction overall. I would say just a few, emails and insults and things like that. But for the most part, pretty positive. I think it's great to have a forum like this. Last year we had a symposium on water that attracted several hundred people. And, I think that conversation is all positive. That said, sometimes it's very, putting together an article that gets a lot of attention can be a challenge. We tried to focus it as strongly as we could, do a really, responsible job. And I'm really proud of it. But in the end, one article that we did about Nestle Waters, bottling water from national forests, the number of people who saw it was incredibly large. And I think the difference is when people have a sense of, when there's something that's very specific and creates a sense of outrage, there's a lot more attention paid to it. So sometimes maybe climate change is one of those issues where it's a little easier for people to ignore.
That's right, sometimes we can forget how subtle it is.
Yeah.
In certain ways. This is a question locally here, trying to provide some insight to somebody who lives in the Sunfair area, which is kind of northern Joshua Tree, central Joshua Tree. It's 2 miles north of Highway 62. Many Joshua trees in the neighborhood, but almost all of them are between 10 and 15 feet tall. So, were these Joshua trees planted by homeowners, or is that part of the remnant population that was there? No small Joshua trees.
I haven't been there, so I'm going to guess. That's all I'm going to do is guess. Probably there was a disturbance. It could have been a fire. There could have been a bulldozer. There could have been a lot of things. But to not have any mature Joshua trees in an area where they're doing really well, or seem to be doing really well, suggests that there was some disturbance that probably was a century ago. And what you're seeing is the reseeding and reestablishment of the plants that were disturbed at that point. That would be my guess without having seen it.
It seems like a good guess. Other reflections, Michael or Ian?
Maybe in kind of getting at the similarity in size, we've long hypothesized that the germination of the Joshua tree and subsequent survivorship of the first couple years that are critical to the plant surviving is an episodic event that we call it. So conditions were right at that moment in time or those few years that allowed those to germinate and pretty much grow at the same rate. We've seen this in other places, and we certainly see it in other plants. We've long talked about that effect, though. What conditions are they? We still don't know. Is it a hard freeze followed by 3 years of late summer rain that nurse that seedling along just enough to get to establishment? And then maybe the next 3 or 4 years or even decade, you don't see any germination of new trees, new Joshua trees. But those ones who did make it through that time are now growing at about the same rate. So that's probably why they're all about the same size.
I would be curious to ask, has there been any more information about the prodigious bloom of a couple years ago, and what that might have been, or whether it's helping them reproduce?
So you all remember, I think it was 2 years ago, where all the Joshua trees bloomed. It got a lot of press, even at the national level, because it wasn't just the Joshua trees in Joshua Tree National Park. It was all the way up into Utah. They were all doing the same thing at the same time. And I don't think we have an answer. I think what Michael said is probably the case. A term that they use for this is called masting, where the plants just all reproduce well at one time. And often that is to swamp out the seed predators so that puts a lot of seeds more seeds than whoever eats the seeds would ever be able to consume, and that ensures that at least some number of them will germinate and do well. And that would have been great, except for we had 2 more years of drought. And so maybe those seeds are still waiting, I don't know, but we need to have what Michael described as maybe a couple of wet years, maybe that late summer rain to really get them going, and we haven't had that, and that's the problem.
Interesting.
We have a specific question, Cam, about how would one volunteer if they wanted to come out with you on a Friday?
That's easy. I should have put my email up there, but if you've got something to write down, it's easy. C Barrows, all the same case, at ucr.edu. Just let me know that you're interested, and we will make sure you get to participate. We've got a lot of different sites that we need to visit this spring and early into the summer if we can. Ian gave us an article earlier this week, I guess it was on Monday, and got a large response. I've probably had a dozen people call me already.
That's great.
And most of the people that showed up today did so because of that article. So we're trying to go, just because I've got other things going, I've got a paying job that does other things, that we're trying to do Fridays. And so if you can break away on Fridays, and it's a 2 to 3 or 4 hour commitment, depending on which site we're doing, we'd love to have you. We're going to then take another break. We have Earthwatch, which is a nonprofit group that gives us volunteers from all over the country and all over the world, and they're going to come back in May. So we'll have a 2 weeks that we're going to be focusing on them, and then continue on from there.
That's great, and I have to plug, MDLT has got one plot out on one piece of land, so it's a smaller effort than the park-wide effort. But if one of the Fridays doesn't work, then you can go see Leslie Hughes over there, and she's got a little information about what we're up to. This is a question specific to Michael. Michael, you mentioned, and can you talk more about a student summit? Does this ring a bell with you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Our interpretive staff, and Karen roped me in on this one this year. She's sitting in the front row. She coordinated it. And what it was is it took some of the best students out of the Coachella Valley and brought them up to have a summit together and learn about climate change from scientists. So we had a lecture series in the morning where we talked about climate change and the different effects. And then in the afternoon, they went out and did sampling. They did just what those pictures had. Same thing, measuring plants, doing line transects, looking for animals. And so what the whole point was is to get them involved, also to get these students to rub elbows with some of the leading scientists in the area and the field. And it's very successful. It's amazing to me on how bright some of the kids are. I guess I lose that, when doing these jobs, and it's really encouraging when a 13 or 14-year-old boy or girl asks a very pointed question that blows your mind. Like, I wouldn't have even thought to ask that question. Like, my gosh, these are the kind of students we need to touch. These are the kind of students that need to get that park experience, that need to see that scientists aren't just a bunch of nerds looking through microscopes. We also are nerds that look through binoculars. and maybe they like that nerd better. I don't know. But the Students Summit is successful. Karen, how long has that been running? This wasn't the first time we did it.
No, I think it's 5 years now.
So we've been doing it for 5 years now. So, but that's what it is. It's not like the Gifted and Talented program, but it does cherry pick the better students out of the Coachella Valley to attend. And it puts a seriousness on the students as well, that these are the best and the brightest, and they're there to learn.
That's great. That brings the question session to a close. If any of you guys have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience, this is your last chance. All right. There was a question from Laura in the audience. Just come up and see us right after the show here, and we'll answer your question about the chuckwalla. Just to plug a few more things to make sure they're out there. Go see MBCA about the Desert-Wise landscaping tours. We're doing the last Black Rock lecture for this year, not the calendar year, but for this year in the series on May 15th. We're going to have David Smith from the National Park. join us, and April Saul, as well as Dr. Bill McDonald from UC Riverside. It should be a great show. We're going to talk about what we can actually achieve, some achievable action items. And last but not least, my baby's been sitting in this room and pretty quiet the whole time. If you haven't met her, yeah, you should go meet her after the show. Let's get a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you to the National Park Association for putting the lecture series on tonight. So let's give another round of applause for the association. And thanks to Copper Mountain College, as always, for hosting us. We wouldn't be here without you. Thank you all very much.